All right, this brings us to the last session of the day. Not the end of the day. We still have some partying to do. But this is the last session. So, and this is a really, 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 really good one. So Industry Pulse Check is basically Holly Bass from NATHO, which you're going to meet in a little bit later. But this is going to be one where we talk about kind of all the agencies, what they're seeing, kind of digest their data, and then we're going to react to it with three top leaders from the industry. But before we do that, can we give a round of applause to Nathan Lang from OneSource? Come on up, Nathan. Nathan. Let's do it. Look at this great group of panelists coming to the stage. All right, Nathan, all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan with OneSource. We are a background screening provider. I've had some great conversations.
Nathan, I hate to say this, you're going to start again. Hold on 1 second.
I'm pretty loud.
You got to dance first. All right, you should be good now.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nathan Lang with OneSource. We are a background screening provider. Over the last 24 hours, I've had some great conversations with folks in this room about their challenges. And I encourage you, if you are experiencing any challenges with your background screening program, or you would like to improve your candidate experience or get them placed quicker, please stop by and introduce yourself, and we'll talk about it.
All right, everyone, give Nathan a round of applause, everybody. And Carly, it's all you.
Thank you, Nathan, for that introduction. And now I'm excited to hand things over to Holly Bass from NATHO, who's going to kick off the first portion of this session, like Oliver said, with the State of the Industry report. So take it away, Holly.
All right. You hear me okay? Okay, awesome. All right, so what I'm going to do today is give a very quick, high-level mini industry update in 10 minutes. That way we have plenty of time for our panelists to talk about the industry, share their experiences. And we are fresh off the NATHO conference about a month ago. So thank you if you went to the NATHO conference and you're a member of NATHO. Thank you so much for your support. If you're not, you know where to find me. I'll be here for the rest of the day and tonight, and I'd love to talk to you. And then we're also going to give a small sampling of just what the experts, the panelists, and the presenters were talking about at the NATHO conference. So first slide. Okay, I can't see it. Okay. All right, so at the NATHO conference, we talked a lot about stabilization in the industry, not quite as heavy of a word as recovery. We are starting to see things stabilize. The projections are starting to stabilize. And we have also noticed that when there is recovery, it is very different and it's uneven across different segments. So we'll talk about that again in a little bit. But some firms are starting to see growth again, which is great. And we're finding that the firms that are seeing growth again are in niche markets, niche positions, niche clients, leveraging their relationships with their clients, whether it's an MSP, whether it's a VMS, tiering, or direct client access, of course, too. And then also we're seeing firms that are growing, diversifying their segments. They weren't in locums, now they're in locums. They weren't in allied, now they're in allied, but diversifying outside of travel nursing. We also continue, and I know everybody in this room feels it too, we see compression with gross margins. We're actually going to show a slide to tell the story of what's going on with gross margins. You're not just feeling it and think it's bad, it's happening, and we're going to show you why it's happening. And it has a lot to do with the bill-pay spread, as well as just the general costs that go into putting a deal together. The locum and international segments are probably the two fastest growing from a projection standpoint. Locums is always super consistent, but international has some growth projected out to 2027. But travel nursing, 3 years, flat, 25, 26, and 27 are all going to be flat. So allied is also expected to be pretty flat. And again, these are just projections that our analysts do, SIA, et cetera. So they're not always perfect. They're not always accurate. It's just the best information that they have at the time to make the best projection that they can. And then, of course, we had 2025 was the year of labor disputes. Did you participate in any strike or labor dispute this year? It was a nice shot in the arm for revenue. I think it was good for the travel staffing companies. I think in 2025, Becker's reported there were about 38 strikes that affected almost 100 hospitals, and there were only like 29 or 30 in the previous year. So, all right, next slide. We are seeing changes and some rebounding in transactions in the M&A space. I'm going to show you a slide on that. Not only how many transactions there's been over the last 8 years, but then what's looking different about those transactions in today's market. And then fresh off the SIA and NATHO annual benchmarking survey, we have the new stat. This is always a common question, like what's your average count per recruiter? What's your average count per desk? Well, right now, at the end of 2025, it came in between 13 and 25, depending on the size of your organization. So it's just kind of good to compare notes and kind of see how you stack rank against your peers. And then this number inched up year over year. We now in travel nursing have 81% of our revenue going through a third party, going through a VMS, going through an MSP. So that is up about 1% or 2% year over year. I mentioned a second ago that Allied is flat, but there are some specialties. We just were talking about this at one of the roundtables. There are a couple of specialties that are gaining traction and have some growth, and they're really around the techs, the CT tech, the X-ray tech, the respiratory tech, and even physical therapy. And then the next 3 bullets kind of, in my mind, go together. So we're hearing, and we're talking to our clients, and we're hearing that hospital margins are stabilizing, which is great, especially after the pandemic. But the decision-making at the hospital is a little bit different. So it's really important when you're calling on clients that you understand their needs. Some are very focused on quality. Some are very focused on cost. Some are very focused on time to fill. And so depending on the client and their needs, you have to understand those clients and be able to speak to that and then be able to kind of come in with your value prop for them. All right, on the next slide, this was also said at the conference that sales is officially now harder than recruitment. I think they've both been pretty hard over the last few years, but sales now is what is considered to be kind of the bottleneck going on. We also heard clinician quit rates are still up. I always say that's bad for healthcare, but good for our business and our industry. And then the next 3 bullets, I also think kind of go hand in hand. We're all here today. We have a lot of great vendors and suppliers that are trying to help us. They're here to point us in the right direction when it comes to AI and technology, offshoring and outsourcing, trying to figure out what to do. Where do you get your best ROI? Where do you get the most efficiencies? Where do you get the cost savings? And I kind of look at AI and technology, offshoring and outsourcing as like the 4-legged stool where you're trying to find those efficiencies and cost savings. But if you were going to add 1 leg to that stool, it's culture. We had the privilege of having Shane Jackson as our keynote speaker at the NATHO conference this year, and he was absolutely outstanding. It was actually a refreshing presentation. We didn't talk about KPIs. We didn't talk about the market. We didn't talk about any metrics. We didn't talk about how hard things have been. We talked about leadership and culture and how much it matters. So just a little advice is if you're looking to make investments in all those areas, make sure you're also investing in your culture, because great culture, great employee engagement drives results. All right, so here's a couple of supporting slides that I mentioned I was going to share with you. And this one is, if you look at the last 8 years, this is the M&A market in our space. You can see pretty consistent in 2019 and 20. Then we had a spike during the pandemic years. And then 2024 rolled around. And you can see that we've shown, and we showed this at the NATHO conference too, you can see that the mix of the transactions are a little bit different, and that the reason for the transactions are a little bit different. So the good news is they're picking up, but they're also picking up for some tough reasons. And we're noticing that sometimes it's a cashless transaction, asset only, or maybe we're just selling off a division or we're selling off travelers. So things do look and feel a little bit different. But some of the motivating factors for any of the transactions right now are around survival, consolidation, scale, leveraging client relationships, reducing costs, and then also maybe leveraging each other's strengths. So it's an interesting time, and we've already had 9 deals in the first quarter of this year. All right, if somebody asked me to show you, tell me a little bit about our growth, tell me a little bit about the size of our industry, this is the slide that I would have shown last year. And matter of fact, Oliver, I probably did show this slide last year in your virtual presentation. So it was interesting because when you look at the projections, it had Allied and Locums about $10 billion for the year, per diems around $5 billion, and nursing knocking on the door again at $16 billion in revenue. Well, if you turn the page, that's not what happened. We had another tough year in 2026. So this next slide looks a little different, and it's a little bit of a different chart, but it does tell the story of kind of the trends and patterns that we're seeing, and also some of the growth that's being predicted, or lack of growth that's being predicted in our industry. So you can see we didn't get anywhere close to 16 billion for travel nursing. We landed right around 14. And then as I mentioned, we're at 14, 14, and 14.1. That might as well be 14, right? So tough year coming up. But again, at least it's consistent and at least it's stabilized. Per diems also did not reach the $5 billion mark. Matter of fact, that is going a little bit backwards. So that's kind of an interesting stat. International is projected to grow in 2027. And then Allied has a little bit of growth in there. And of course, Locums has a nice projection of growth over the next 2 years. So that's a nice kind of, I think, representation of the uneven recovery that's happening, but also representing the stabilization we're starting to see too. All right, this was another topic I mentioned a few minutes ago, and this is really the gross margin story. Where is it going? Where's the money going? And why are we having such a tough time? Somebody said this at the NATHO conference, and I thought it was so impactful. We work way too hard to have 19% margins, but this is unfortunately our reality right now. So what we did is we put this together in partnership with SIA. And you can see it shows the trends of the bill rate going up pre-pandemic and obviously this past year. Of course, inflation, cost of living, all of those things contribute to justifying a $90 bill rate. But then when you look at where the dollars are going from a wage and pay standpoint, 42% of that is going back to the traveler, back to the clinician. And then if you look at housing and meals, all the tax-free dollars, that is also going back to the traveler, and that is the highest it's ever been from a percentage standpoint. Then we have risks mitigation, we have workers' comp, liability, all the things that we're required to carry. Let's go back one slide. AJ, go back one slide. There you go. Thank you. When you look at the cost of doing business, that's also now over 5%. So then how it all adds up to gross margin, the days of the 25 and 30% margins, they're tough. They're tough to pull off because of all these circumstances and components of putting a deal together. So last year we landed right at 19.2%, and this is for the traditional travel side of the business for nursing. Back when I was running a staffing company and running the day-to-day operations and sales, it was very common to earn and also expect 13, 14% EBITDA margins. Well, now look at our EBITDA. Because of all the dynamics, because of all the cost components and categories, lowest that the industry has ever seen at 4.3%. So that's what's going on with the gross margins. That's where the dollars are going. Somebody also mentioned like, hey, are we just not being disciplined with our margins? And it's like, no, we're being disciplined. We just have a tough set of circumstances that has continued year over year. Be interested to see what the panel has to say about that maybe later. All right, and then this is my last slide of the day. Is the one of our most, I think, proudest accomplishments this year was our commissioning of the KPMG cost of labor study. And we always partner with a third party because it validates the data and it didn't come from somebody in our industry. And this was the third time that we commissioned this study. And guess what? All three times it said the same thing, that travelers are actually just as cost effective as a permanent employee. So when you look at this slide on the right-hand side, it shows all the cost categories that go into from an hourly basis of putting a permanent staff clinician into place. And then on the left side, it shows the comparative figure of putting a traveler in the same position at the same facility. And you can see each time the traveler came in not only as efficient or effective from a cost perspective, but actually cheaper. So when we hear our clients talk about travelers being a last resort or we're trying to get rid of all of our travelers, it's honestly nonsense. And it's really up to us as the staffing companies to go in and help them understand our model, show our value, and show that we're actually a partner and we're actually a solution when it comes to labor and filling positions within the facility that we're actually there to help them, and we're not just an alternative, we are actually a solution. So I thought this was a really great slide to end on today. And the cost of labor study, again, that is something that we take all of our membership fees, we put it right back into the organization, and then we provide that report to all of you. That report is free for you and it's available for anybody to view. It's on our website, and you don't have to be a member to view that. We want you using it. And then I think what I'm going to do is save our membership perks for tonight. And when I do the awards piece. So I'll save this one. So Carly, I'm going to turn it over to you and the panel.
Yay. Okay. Thank you so much, Holly. Let's give Holly a hand. And Holly is announcing one of our awards later, so that's when she will give you her little NATHO pitch. But we are big fans of NATHO over here, and that was an awesome presentation. So now we're going to move into the second portion of this session, where we'll hear from the rest of our panelists about how they're seeing these themes, challenges, and opportunities actually play out inside of their organizations and across the industry more broadly. So I will give it to each of you to introduce yourselves. Jenny, you can get started.
I'm Jenny Lyman. I'm the COO of Titan Medical. We do all segments of healthcare, nursing, allied, long-term care. We've been in business since 2001. So,
I'm Chris Sund. I'm with Uniti Med, GQR Healthcare, Nebula. We do permanent staffing, travel staffing, locum tenens, and AI recruitment tools.
I'm Rich Smith, Atlas MedStaff. We started back in 2012, and we're still kicking.
Awesome. All right, we'll dive right into our first question. So one of the big themes that Holly touched on was the growing divide between agencies that are finding ways to grow again and agencies that are still really struggling in the market. So where are you seeing the biggest gap between high-performing agencies and everyone else? Whoever wants to get started.
I think the biggest gap is really in accountability and execution. I think as the market has shifted, a lot of companies have lowered their standards or accepted the excuses that it's tough, that it's hard. And it is, and we have to acknowledge that and accept that. But I say it all the time that those are a set of circumstances, right? We have to figure out a way to be successful within those set of circumstances. And I think continuing to hold our teams to the high standards, holding them accountable, and just celebrating every win along the way is extremely important. Because everybody just has to work harder right now and continue to develop the relationships with the candidates, with the facilities. The days of a transactional recruiting are over. It's a relationship recruiting model that shows the success.
I agree, and I'll just add on top of that two different parts. I get to talk to a lot of companies, and the ones that I hear that have been growing the last couple of years, one of the things that's really stuck out is a lot of them are going out. They're getting their own direct business. They're finding their jobs, and they're getting aggressive on it. And those ones have had a lot of success. The other part of that is just going out and finding ways to give better solutions to the clients you have. And so it's delivering really well at what you have, but listening to what they want and delivering. Maybe you're just doing nursing and then you started adding allied, maybe added education or locum tenens. But it's also looking at those service lines and going, this is what we did in the past, but to go forward, it's, this is what we need to do. When you look at it, 2019, I thought was a really great year. And if you told me in 2019 and 2026, we were going to do 14 million in nursing, right? And we were going to grow that much in allied and locum tenens, I'd be pumped. It doesn't feel like that. But the truth is, it's still a really good market. Just whether are you still in it from the competitors or not.
Yeah, I agree. It's execution and perseverance. I lived through 08, 09, the financial crisis, and I was at Medical Solutions at the time as a client manager, and we had 35 open jobs at one point. Medical Solutions, right? You know who they are now, right? But 08, 09, we had 35 open jobs, and 20 of them were in St. Louis and Kansas City, and that was my territory. And imagine trying to sell $55 bill rates in St. Louis and Kansas City at that time. But it was perseverance through that time. And that's what really grew us through that. And I'm applying a lot of that to what we're doing right now. And I think I see a lot of us in our industry that are doing the exact same thing. Just persevere through this time, push, really understand what you're good at and execute that. And when the market is more normal, you're going to be that much better at what you're doing.
Love that. Thank you all. Our next question, another thing that came up several times in Holly's presentation was this idea that the market might be stabilizing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it feels like recovery yet. So from where you sit, what does winning and growth actually look like today?
Ooh, I'll start. Winning and growth right now is boring. It is understanding, like I said, what you're good at and really focusing on that. Focus on the fundamentals, the blocking and tackling of every day of phone calls and text messages and building those relationships. That it's not sexy, but it really builds toward the future for you. It makes your recruiters better, and it makes your client managers better, and it makes your back office better every day.
I think in some ways winning looks the same it did in the past. The goals are different, but hopefully you're still celebrating wins, right? If you get a placement and you're not high-fiving each other, then maybe you shouldn't be in the room. I think that if you look at it that way, we're all winning. It's just making sure now the goals maybe have changed a little bit, but if you're not setting real goals for your teams and celebrating when you're achieving those, I highly recommend you start.
I agree 100%. It's not just placements that you have to celebrate, it's the little wins along the way too. If a newer recruiter gets a profile, it's everything big and small along the way. You have to celebrate it, and it has to be from the top down. Creating that culture and that environment is what's going to keep the recruiters and account managers, client managers going day in and day out.
I love that. Celebrate all your wins. We're also starting to see healthcare staffing M&A activity pick up, like Holly had mentioned in her presentation, which always creates a lot of conversation around what that means for the rest of the market. So our next question is, do you think consolidation creates more opportunity or more risk for mid-sized and independent firms?
I think it's both. I think, with the acquisitions and the large companies just continuing to get larger, it makes them, they obviously have more money for tech and all the things, but it also makes them less agile, right? Which benefits us smaller to mid-sized companies that are here that, we are more agile. We can make quick decisions. We can, shift as need be without, going through months of conversations and board meetings and things like that. We can react quickly. And I think that is to our benefit.
Coming from somebody that has been on both sides of an acquisition, right? 5 years ago, we acquired a locum tenens company that the owner was, he was ready to retire and be done. And one of the smartest decisions we ever could have made. Fast forward 2.5 years ago, we were then acquired by another company. And so our GQR Uniti Med, brand is because of that. And, there's a lot of struggles. You got different mission statements, different values, different ways of beliefs and what you guys are trying to go for. And you also have really talented people that helped you get to where you are. And I rarely do you go through an acquisition and do all those people that helped you get there get to come out on the other side. And so that's really hard. We're a people business. We're as good as what are the people we bring in. And when you're telling them, you buy into what we do, we want you to win, we want you to win, and we're asking all this to run through walls, and then we turn around and go, I'm really sorry, we got to do a layoff, or we're going to have to make this decision. And it's not always because of performance. These are just good people. I just don't need two of you doing the exact same job. So there's a risk to it. You lose great talent. It disrupts your day-to-day. You don't go through that and then just move on from it. You wear that. At the same time, the synergies and the things you can get out of it are also amazing. You now inherit new family members, new people with new ideas, new talents. We have service lines we never did, and I don't know if we would have But because of it, we have doors being open for both of our companies. We've been able to grow a lot through a really tough market that I don't know if we would have been able to do without it. So I'm not saying it doesn't come with some really hard struggles, but it can also be extremely good for you.
Rich, you have anything there?
It's both. You said it, right? I mean, for all three of us, our company size, it gives us the opportunity to be more agile in the market, right? It really does. But at the same time, we can watch what all those other bigger, larger companies are doing. I love, where's Terry? I love watching AMN's quarterly earnings and then seeing, okay, this is coming. Where's she at? There we go. Yes. I love watching quarterly earnings from AMN. I loved watching cross country too. I'm going to miss it. And seeing what's coming for us and then understanding, okay, I can be more agile. This ship isn't that big to turn. I can keep up the current pace and understand what's happening in the market and make those changes ahead of time. So I'm ready for what they're seeing right now.
One thing I loved most in Holly's presentation was the emphasis on culture. So touching on that culture and leadership aspect here, because it has been several difficult years in the industry. And like Holly said, culture and leadership seem to matter more than ever right now. So what leadership behaviors or cultural traits are you seeing matter most inside of strong organizations?
Listening. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest one for us, is listening, not only to our internal employees, but to all of our travelers too. Understanding what they're seeing in the market right now, understanding what our recruiters are dealing with, understanding what our client managers are dealing with from a vendor level, understanding what's happening from an accounting standpoint, from collections. And I think just listening and understanding how the market is right now and then making decisions based on that.
I think it's staying engaged with your employees and your travelers and not pretending like everything, is perfect and fine. It's acknowledging what's going on in the market, being transparent, being honest, and then coming back to celebrating the wins, and again, it comes from the top down. Just, it keeps them motivated. It keeps them going, all along the way, because it is tough and they're working really hard. And we at Titan have maintained our high standard. We haven't reduced our standard due to the market. And I think that's what's helped us sustain, during this time, is because we kept that standard. But we made sure we celebrate the wins, big and small, all along the way. And holding the team accountable. I think that's extremely important, and not allowing, them to, excuse away what their actions or lack of actions are, instead investing back in them to be better. We've started, recruiter boot camps and things like that. We've invested back in our team to help them be more successful in this time. And I think they feel that, they feel like we believe in them, and as we continue to push them.
Yeah, I like that reciprocal leadership. You're investing in them because we are asking a lot. It is really tough right now. And I think you even take outside of work, it used to be like wake up at 5 a.m. Now it's wake up at 4 a.m. Now they're saying 3 a.m. and take a cold plunge and I need peptides and I need to work out and all this crap. And it's like, I'm tired, right? I am tired. I need this, and my work is expecting this, and this is what's going on. And we're expecting everyone to be their best. And if we're not investing into them, how do we expect, the return? I think you really have to pay attention. Like Rich said, a lot of times your employees will emotionally leave your company before they physically leave your company. And if you aren't paying attention to your employees, like really, really knowing if they're seen and heard and feeling valued, they may be filling a seat, but they're not really with your company. And so I think there's immense value in taking that time to make sure that they know that they matter, that you care about them, and that you're investing into them.
That was a very powerful line, Chris. I like that. Obviously, we talked about margins in Holly's presentation, which continue to be under pressure across the industry. And agencies are being forced to make difficult decisions around pricing, operations, teams, and growth strategies. So what separates agencies that are adapting well to these margins from agencies that are mostly just reacting to the market? Big question.
I think the biggest thing is not just waiting for it to get better, right? You have to be proactive and you have to make the adjustments now. We're very fortunate. We're privately held. We've had one owner since inception. He's managed the company extremely well. And so we're very fortunate, but that takes a lot of, managing your budget very well and cutting costs. We're fortunate we haven't had to do a layoff either, but, budgeting your costs, whether it be resources or, who you're using for clinicals or background checks or, any of those things, you just have to be very budget conscious. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that play into your EBITDA, right? So it's not just the margin going down. That makes it hard. But on top of the fact that margins are tighter, because keep in mind, revenue is higher, right? We're making more per transactions according to the data. So the same deal, we're actually making more dollars, we're making less margins. Yet the EBITDA is going down. And I think a lot of that has to do with what was being made 3 to 4 years ago in investments and infrastructure that was put into play. When you're doing that type of sales, you have this many employees, you have this much on your payroll, you invest this much into your real estate, maybe your building, your technology, and you get yourself into contracts. And then all of a sudden, it goes down. But all of a sudden, I'm like, well, I'm signed to that lease, and I'm signed to that contract, and I'm signed to that bill. And so I think it's actually going to get a lot better. And I think it's going to get a lot better because a lot of those contracts are ending, they're coming up, we're getting smarter with our money, we're getting way more efficient. But I think there's more to the story than, just saying like, oh, it's getting harder, it's tighter. I think a lot of us, I can say at least for myself, I wish I could go back in time and I can't, but I overcommitted and thought, man, we're just going to keep going like this. And we didn't. And we weren't prepared for when it dropped. So,
yeah. Cost control. I really think I had a conversation at SIA a couple of years ago with a light industrial company that told us it only took a pandemic for you guys to catch up to the rest of us in staffing. And along with that then came all the shiny objects, right? All the ancillary products that you can add. And I think understanding, does it make the candidate experience better? Does it make the recruiter or the client manager experience better? And if it doesn't, but it's super cool, and I'm guilty of that because I love super cool technology, but if it doesn't make either of those experiences better, don't do it. Don't sign that contract. And there are lots of great vendors out there right now that make the candidate experience better, but there's a lot of just AI stuff that doesn't. And don't fall victim to that. I know others have. Don't fall victim to that. Ask those critical questions and really understand, does this make the experience better? And if it doesn't, you got to move on.
Yeah, I love the technology piece. I'm going to throw you a question that I did not send to you originally. I love my curveball questions. But what technology or tools have you implemented that are most impactful in your organizations right now?
I've got two. Great Recruiters is the first one, and Adam's not here. And he's a very good friend of mine, but he's got a great product that, imagine not knowing who you're talking to on the other end of the phone. Imagine if your Yelp didn't exist or Google didn't exist and you didn't know where you were going for dinner or where you were shopping. Great Recruiters gives you that option. You can go out and you can go out and look at who that recruiter is that you're talking to and understand who they really are and what they care about, what their family life is like. And you can understand at a very early level if you connect with them. And the second one is it's Toro. It's an AI product within Bullhorn right now that really helps us understand how good our data is, or in some cases how bad our data was and how dirty our data was. And so we have spent the better part of 2 or 3 years now cleaning that data and making sure that what we're getting out of that, each one of those candidates there is good information coming back to our recruiters so they can use that. So it's actionable. So when they have that next conversation with their recruiter or with their traveler, that it's a valuable conversation.
Aside from staff, which is amazing, we have an app that we've really developed over the last couple of years. It's a white label app. We partnered with a company that has been amazing to work with, and they've really tailored it to what we do and what we need. And, we've also launched an MSP. We're just shy of a year. And so they also developed an MSP portion within that app. It created a better candidate experience for them to be able to search jobs, do their time cards. We're rolling out other things with it as well. On the client side, we do have clients that use it as well. They can post their needs. They can choose their candidates. They can review their compliance. They can review their billing. It has AI incorporated to it, so it can look at all the data over a period of time and tell them, what they're going to need or, where they're spending the most, those types of things. And that's been an amazing tool for us that has helped us, both on the candidate and client side.
Well, if I didn't say Nebula, I'd probably get kicked. So I'm going to have to say our sister company, Nebula. For those of you who don't know, it's an LLM, and it was built with around a database of 200 million people. So basically 90% of the US market we have. That means pretty much everyone in this room, you're in our system. I know where you worked, your phone number, your email. I know it's creepy. But what it does is people are like, that's great. But all the tools you use, like LinkedIn, Recruiter, that you still have to go InMail. You have to message them. I can use Indeed Recruiter. I can search. It does that. But then you tell it to go ahead and start headhunting for me. And so the recruiter turns it on, and it starts emailing and texting whatever job you threw in there. And it's going to headhunt new people every single day, over and over again, until it either hires them or it hits a wall, depending on what the specialty is. It's been really good for us. We do sell that directly to companies. We have agencies that purchase it from us. And so it's been a big part of our growth, I would say, the last year. With that said, the other one was investing in Simpliant and just a technology. So when we go to our clients, a lot of times people go, does that just mean it's your MSP? No. There is times we're using it is for our MSP, but we actually use it for really good direct clients. If we're putting 20 or more people, sometimes those clients don't want to have to go through emails for their compliance, and they want data, and they want analytics, and they want to be able to manage a float pool. And so finding a platform that allowed us to compete in that space, to go in there and say, we're not just going to be the person you turn to when you need this. We can do a lot more solutions around your staffing and help your internal team fill more roles.
Awesome. Love those answers. I'm going to ask one more question before we open it up to the floor for 5 minutes for audience questions. I also stole this question and asked our first panel, but I want to ask you guys too. But the trick here is that you can't give the same word that the first panel gave. So if you could describe the current market in one word, what would it be? And you have to tell me why. And it can't be any of the words from the first session, which I don't totally remember. So
I don't remember them either.
You can have a minute to think about your word. I majored in writing, so I love words. I need to know what you would pick.
Chris, I'm going to default to you. You're going to go first.
That's hard. I remember roller coaster and just going, yup.
Yep, same.
And that's what, we're on a roller coaster. At the same time, like I said, I think conversation's been very optimistic. So I'm going to say opportunity.
I'm going to say cycle. If you've done this for any amount of time, you understand our industry goes in cycles, and we are just in one part of that cycle right now. That was a terrible answer. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's fine.
Can we ask Holly too? I feel like
Holly,
we're ignoring
you need to
Holly
give a
here.
word too, Holly.
I'm very concerned. Look, the only way to look at the market is positive and optimistic, because I think what Chris said about, like, if you were to look back at 2019 and look at the size of our industry, you'd be like, that's amazing. So what you have to do is you have to kind of like put your hand over the graphs between 2020 and 23 and then watch it go up. And yeah, there are some segments that are flat. Yes, there's some that are growing, but it's still such a huge market that I think we're only going to be on the uptick from here. So I'm just a positive and optimistic person. So that's really the only way you can be when you think about the cycles and the change and the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I would say optimistic. I try to be very optimistic when I start every day, and some days that's more challenging than others. But I am very optimistic, and we're seeing it in our production. It is inconsistent still, but our highs are getting higher, and our lows are not as low. And so that feels good no matter how often it is. it feels good and it changes the synergy in the office. And, I'm seeing our teams happier, more engaged, looking forward to coming to work, excited. And yeah, I'm just feeling really optimistic.
That's good. You all chose happy words. I like that. All right. We do have about 5 minutes for audience questions. If you have questions for Holly about NATHO, about her presentation, or for any of our other incredible panelists, please raise your hand and a member of our team will come bring you a microphone. I know it's late in the day, but you've got to have questions. Maybe going once, going twice. Okay, awesome. Well, we can wrap up a little early then. Let's give a hand for all of our panelists. And then I am going to invite Oliver on stage to give a little closing remarks for us before we leave and then regroup later tonight. So thank you all. This has been so much fun.